Hi, I'm Tim. Welcome to Watchbox and thanks for logging on. Everything you see here is for sale. Names, references, and prices in the description below, and we are looking to add inventory. Whether you're selling a single watch or an entire collection, we are buying with no upper limit on value. For once, I'm asking you to supply me, and to sell a watch, reach out to the same address, tmosso@thewatchbox.com. All right. Nah, we've seen enough Rolex in the last 48 hours. Chagère le coup, that's more like it. 200 pieces launched in 2010. This is the Duomet Chronograph White Gold Limited Edition. A timepiece that I owned for 4 years and found to be my most accurate mechanical watch ever, as even with the chronograph running, it would consistently run plus 0.5 to 1 second a day. So the watch truly is what JLC promised, a chronograph that can run with the precision of a chronometer. Now the dial is extravagant. As you can see, rose gold hands are for the chronograph, white gold hands are for the time, 2 separate power reserve indicators, 50 hours each, and a 1/6 of a second foudroyant or flying seconds hand, coaxial, constant time and chronograph seconds, and then you can see there's a single digit rolling or scrolling minutes disc on a mono counter that includes hours and minutes. Now the watch is a wonderful piece of horological theater to operate, as even the reset is wonderfully animated. The timepiece includes a fine case of gray gold, which is 18 karat white gold that never needs to be rhodium plated. You can see the lugs were built as separate components and then welded on, with all evidence of the welded joint removed to double finish the case, black polishing the lugs and satin finishing the case band. Even the crown is a spectacular piece, being one of the finest I know of aesthetically and in terms of tactile feel. Turn it all over and you can see the twin mainspring barrel, dual drivetrain, dual wing caliber 380. It's built like a Longa movement with the same quality of mirrored bevels, that German silver material, nickel, copper, zinc. Since we're in the Canton of Vaud and the Vallée du Jeu, we're going to call it Maillot, not German silver. And you'll appreciate that the watch features both fired blued and black polished screws. There's a 4-peak crenellated column wheel for actuating the chronograph mechanism, and then you have one escapement and one balance, acting essentially to start and stop the 2 separate sides of the movement. The idea being that when you start the chronograph, you double the power supply, so there's no loss of balance amplitude and the timing doesn't slow down. This is inspired by a minute repeating chronometer in the JLC Heritage Gallery built in the 1880s, and the look of this movement is styled to resemble that one exactly. The finish on this watch is finer than any JLC you will encounter below $100,000. It's that good. It has a full deploying clasp, and as you'll note, on my 16 centimeter circumference wrist, it wears well. It has a lot of presence, but it's also versatile. With the black dial and the white metal case, you can consider this a sporty watch that looks just as good with casual attire as it does with formal dress. All right, Pepsi Gmt, now it's your turn. This was the hottest watch of 2018. I'm not gonna lie, I'm not gonna parse. This is a watch that a lot of folks still desire today. In fact, it seems to have leapfrogged over the newer but somehow less appealing Batman or Batgirl, depending on what you call the Jubilee bracelet BLNR. This is the BLRO, and it was the first steel Serichrome bezel Pepsi Gmt Master II. Now, of course, this is a watch defined in part by its bezel and its bracelet. The Jubilee was an original option in the mid-1950s, right back to the first GMT Masters built for Pan Am, but it does feel a little bit unaccustomed to see it on a super case watch, as it was discontinued after the previous 5-digit reference. No more, it's back. The watch has a 3-day power reserve, 70 hours if we're being precise. It features a chronometer certification, 100-meter water resistance, plenty of Loom, such that it's indistinguishable from a Submariner after dark. And I have to say that the Super Jubilee has the elegance of a dress watch bracelet. You can see the small links, the polished centers, but it also has the physical integrity of a sports watch bracelet. And because of the many individual links and the gaps between them, it vents the wrist better than a Submariner on a hot day on the Oyster 3-link bracelet. Now you can see there is an easy link system built in, 5 millimeters of tool-free adjustment, and then you've got a double locking system with the lift lock and then the clamshell. So those two keep the watch resolutely closed. Anti-magnetic hairspring, guaranteed accuracy, no worse than -2 + 2 seconds per day, and of course you've got that 24-hour second time zone. Now if you set that second time zone to GMT, Greenwich Mean Time, you can use the bezel, which has a ceramic insert, to calculate the time in your destination port or airport by using the destination GMT offset. So this is a very versatile watch. We're gonna throw this one into the light and do a quick Loom shot, and then we'll cut to our next watch. We're back with the Chromolite proprietary blue loom that Rolex uses. Of course, Rolex makes its own loom. It may as well. It makes every other part of the watch. And very visible, you can see the additional second time zone between 9 o'clock and 10 o'clock, so this is a fully loomed dial. The watch you see here is part of a series made from 2012 to 2014, less than 200 made, about 176. And it's a watch that is salt of the earth and bedrock here at Watchbox, but objectively rare and scarcely seen anywhere else in the world. Have you guessed? It's the Torbjorn Chronograph S, the Chronograph Sport from the line Sport Collection, made from 2012 to 2014 before Torbjorn gave up trying to work with aluminum and started making these watches in titanium. It's the same basic running gear that won the 2007 GPHG Aiguille d'Or, or the Golden Hand, which is the grand prize at the Oscars of watchmaking, effectively Best Picture. So you get the GPHG Champion movement with a unique integrated bracelet case that's only 11.4 millimeters thick, 42 millimeters, but wears almost like a lugless watch. Super slim, comfortable, and at under 60 grams, insanely light. Bulgari beat Torbjorn to the aluminum sports watch in 1998, but in 2012, Torbjorn made the aluminum sports watch famous, and these are hugely collectible as well as very wearable watches. Though it's a 42, it wears like a 40, and being feather light, it's even more impressive than the subsequent titanium watch. You know you're looking at the tie when you see the very gray nickel anthracite. Turning the watch over, you can see one of the standout features of the Chronograph Sport is that the movement is also rendered in aluminum, and you can see it has a nickel anthracite coating that gives it a little bit of a darker aesthetic than the case. The barrels at the center, the Côte de Genève, radiate out like ripples on a pond, and then two different ways to drive the watch. JLC manages to achieve chronograph operation without a loss of balance amplitude by adding a second mainspring barrel. Torbjorn adds a second drivetrain, so the arbor drives the chronograph, that's the axle of the barrel, and then the toothed edge drives the time-telling functions. So the power reserve is 80 hours with the chronograph off, 24 hours with the chronograph on, but you don't need to run it for more than 10 minutes because the largest chronograph register is 10 minutes. 1/100th of a second, making a 1-second circuit, 20 seconds, 10 minutes. You'll also appreciate that unlike the standard Chronograph, which features rather crowded subdials with tachymeters that aren't really useful, this one does away with those and opens up the center with smoked sapphires that allow you to see the running gear that actuate all of these dials, including the second escapement that operates the foudroyant. You'll also appreciate that the numerals on the dial are actually three-dimensional. They're solid applique blocks of luminova, so while they might look like printed features by night, by day they have a wonderful height, width, and length to them. This is a timepiece that was the recipient of 2 patents, one for the rocker system that allows you to start and stop the chronograph, and of course there is the arbor drive system for the chronograph, so the dual drivetrain internally is the other patent. This is an impressive watch. If you want a more conventional chronograph, however, or you crave automatic winding and water resistance, you can't do better than a Rolex Daytona. The 116520, it's a model that came out in 2000 and was discontinued as you see it here in 2015 with the ceramic bezel arriving for 2016. Now this watch is an M series, so 2008, and it's fascinating because the Daytona doesn't look all that different from the original automatic Zenith-powered Daytona of 1988. It's a bit of an evergreen shape, and the fact that Rolex was able to simply refresh the bezel and continue the watch into a new decade speaks to the power and the resistance to obsolescence enjoyed by this design. I'm not going to lie to you though, I didn't find the Daytona to be the most natural match for a ceramic bezel, and I know you guys are with me, at least in part, believing that the steel on steel look is better for the Daytona, and again, being discontinued, it is highly sought. 3-day power reserve, 100 meters water resistant, vertical clutch, chronograph actuation, so it starts without any seconds hand jump, and then you've got the column wheel, which is very crisp. The watch also includes a full balance bridge and a free sprung index for shock resistance, and of course it is a certified chronometer. It is anti-magnetic thanks to the niobium zirconium hairspring. It is water resistant and it is shock resistant. This is a full service sports watch and fully loomed. Of course, 100 meters with screw down crowns and pushers. You can take this one swimming without a second thought. Now here's a watch that's difficult to classify. This is the Audemars Piguet Royal Oak Offshore Torbjorn chronograph, reference 26257. It is an absolute monster. The 257 is 44 millimeters in diameter. And I have to say, all things considered, I had to look twice to realize this was an Offshore and not a Royal Oak. There's not a whole lot to give you any cue, as the standard Royal Oak Torbjorn chronograph is the same size, 44 millimeters, but it's the presence of the rubber-clad bezel on this one that changes the identity, and there is a lot to see. This is a 2009 model made in 25 pieces in red gold with the rubber-clad bezel, rare on the Royal Oak Torbjorn chronograph model. It also has radially arrayed rose gold Arabic numerals, and as you can see, it has a Grand Tapisserie dial of extraordinary dimensions. Now we're going to get as close as we can here because the Torbjorn is a true pleasure. It's free sprung, beats weight at 21.6, has an overcoil hairspring made by hand, and as you can see, both the carriage and the bridge for the Torbjorn are black polished to a mirror shine. That is finished off using diamond paste. That's how that black polish is achieved. There's also engine turning underneath, and the caliber 2889 is a column wheel lateral clutch chronograph with a tourbillon built by APRP, Renault et Papi, the elite division of Audemars Piguet that builds its highest complications, its prestige pieces, and all of the high-dollar Richard Mille complications. Now, not only do you get a remarkably crisp column wheel and a gorgeous traditional lateral clutch, you get a 3-day power reserve, so this is a watch that has impressive legs between windings. It is also a large watch, but unlike the standard Offshore, it is not thick. It's just over 14, it's about 14.1 millimeters thick, meaning it's broad and it's flat. I don't have the wrist for this watch. I would probably recommend you have a wrist of at least 17 centimeters circumference before you try to wear this thing. That said, oh my gosh, the quality inside and out. Not every Audemars Piguet watch is handmade and hand finished. They all include some handcraft, but not this degree. Every single part on this movement has been finished to the highest grade. You can see that mirror anglage lighting up. It's optically smooth, rounded, and probably finished off with a spinning peg of ebony with diamond paste on the end. Real Côte de Genève, laid down by a abrasive wheel, and engine turning beautifully overlapped on the base plate. All of the steel components of the chronograph have been satin finished on their top and beveled on their side, and you can see that the same treatment has been rendered on all of the jewel and screw countersinks, with all of the screws black polished on their heads. 25 pieces made and truly special. A rubber-clad Royal Oak Offshore chronograph tourbillon. This is the ultimate in excess. You'll also note that the case, and I'm going to show this, the case is in outstanding condition, and this watch has just returned from service with Audemars Piguet in Les Brassus. Now let's talk for a moment about a watch that debuted in 2019 and frankly is exactly what the moment calls for. An extravagant, forward-looking, modern design that is nevertheless universally wearable and set it and forget it reliable. This is the Dayfi Classic Blue Ceramic. As you can see, it has an open dial inside a 41mm blue ceramic case being composed mostly of blue ceramic, sapphire, and rubber, with a few titanium components thrown in. It is feather light. Throw it on my 16 centimeter circumference wrist. The 41 wears beautifully. Less than 47 millimeters lug to lug means it wears on a wrist as small as 13 centimeters circumference. It's nice and thin. And of course, the ceramic of the case is hypoallergenic, super light, and almost immune to scratches. That's the real advantage of ceramic. If you hate scratches and swirls that adulterate the quality of your watch's finish, this watch has no such concerns. And you can see the contrast here is outstanding, as there's polishing used on the upper rim of the bezel. You can see the mid bezel is satin finished, and then the case is all of a matte finish that gives it a lovely contrast between the other two surfaces, and it subdues the watch in the light. Integrated strap, blue to match, and a dial of extravagant anodized blue as well as black. You can see underneath the Elite Caliber 670, bidirectional quickset, hacking seconds. It has a unlubricated silicone escapement for long intervals between services, automatic winding with a 50-hour power reserve, and again, all of this 100 meters water resistant. If you hate refinishing watches, if you hate scratching watches, if you want a watch that's going to look just as good 20 years, 30 years down the line, a ceramic case is the way to go. But let's say you want a Zenith with higher style. Well, the best of both worlds is this Bulgari Octo Chronograph, a timepiece 41 millimeters in titanium. It combines a Zenith El Primero caliber inside with the Bulgari Octo case shape that is becoming more and more recognized these days as one of the standards in high horology iconography. When you throw it on the wrist, you can see this 100-meter sports watch is a full-service Sportster. 41 millimeters, but it wears larger. The timepiece is only about 13.5 millimeters thick, so it sits flat enough on the wrist. Being 100 meters water resistant, it is a true all-arounder with an integrated rubber strap of substance and quality. It's comfortable, it's impressive, it's wearable on a smaller wrist because of its lightness. And if you flip it over, you realize you're getting Zenith's most famous movement to boot. 36,000 vibrations per hour, and of course, it is finished and built by Zenith for Bulgari, so you get all the same features, including the combination of blued and black polished screws both. They serve different purposes. The blued screws are used for adjustment, and the black polished screws are used for fixing components in place. The timepiece, of course, also features a wonderful column wheel feel, so it is super sharp and super crisp. You can also see the blue column wheel interacting with the lateral clutch. All of this as technically proficient as any Zenith. This is the same movement that you would have seen in the original Daytona back in 1988, albeit in higher spec, as Rolex detuned this movement from 10 beats per second to 8. This is the full-fat El Primero in the full-fat Octo case. 110 individual facets on this case, all of them either satinated or blasted. There's a media blasted titanium dial to match. But if you want your Zenith to look like a Zenith, I have this Chronomaster limited edition, 38 millimeters in stainless steel, 50 pieces constructed. This is an exceptional watch, not just because of its cool grayscale aesthetic and its wearable 38 millimeter size, but because this is a timepiece that features a, we're gonna get as close as we can here, a chronometer certified movement. So this is the caliber 4061, or 4067, pardon me. 4061 would be an open dial. And it's exactly what we saw in the Bulgari, with the exception of the fact that this is a no-date watch, meaning it has a much cleaner dial. So between the grayscale look, the no-date dial, the 38 millimeter size, and the chronometer certification, this is an El Primero with serious pedigree. 36,000 vibrations per hour, column wheel, lateral clutch, 100-meter water resistance, 50-piece limited series, all of that with this lovely Chronomaster form that wears even better in the smaller sizes. The combination of satin and polish, bevels and creases makes for a gorgeous and enduring look that will never be dated. If you don't like the fact that many Zenith watches have copped a bit of an LVMH corporate look like Hublot and Tag Heuer, this is the antidote to the common Zenith. This is a throwback in many regards without being a vintage watch or a vintage reissue. This isn't a replica of an old watch. This is a modern classic in its own right. And speaking of modern classics, I can't say that there's any company other than maybe Greubel Forsey and Laurent Ferrier that builds watches in series with better finish than Laurent Ferrier. Laurent Ferrier, of course, launching its Gallet Square, not forcing you to pay the precious metal premium, as the Gallet Square 41 millimeters with a cushion case is available in stainless steel as you see it right here. The dial is simple but deceptively so. You can see that there's a vertical satin finish, a little bit like stainless steel, individual white gold hand polished dart style indices. There's a dimple track outboard and high polish to read the minutes, a sunken sub-register with concentric guilloche or azurage, and those lovely assegai or spear shaped white gold hands. Turn it all over and you have the caliber FBN 22901. Okay, this was developed by Laurent Ferrier in conjunction with La Fabrique du Temps, which is an LVMH high horology house based out of Geneva. There's a lot to love here. First, there's that finish. The bevels are a mile wide. Philippe Dufour draws his bevels out deeper, but few can compete with this. When Philippe Dufour is the superlative you have to name, you get a sense of just how broad and beautiful these bevels are. This is the way Roger Dubuis used to do anglage, and this should be the standard for the industry. There's a lot of black polish too, as you can see the regulator and the half bridge for the balance, as well as the bridge for the rotor. You can also appreciate that the timepiece with a 72-hour power reserve has remarkable endurance as well as remarkable architecture. There is no Swiss lever in this escapement. There are two nickel phosphorus wheels, and they impulse the balance only in its direction of travel. So it's a double direct impulse system based on Breguet's 1802 natural escapement. That improves power reserve, allowing the watch to reach 3 days of reserve de marche with a single barrel. It also improves precision, and you can see 6 position adjustment is exceptional. Most chronometers are going to be adjusted to 5, so to go 6 positions gives deviation nowhere to hide. And you can see if you look again at that black polished half bridge for the balance, 1, 2, 3, 4, and then a 5th interior angle where 2 bevels meet and create a sharp crease. That's as difficult to achieve as an outward angle or a black polished surface. So there's a lot going on here, right down to the micro engine turning on the base plate and the deeply ridged and remarkably broad Côte de Genève across the bridges. If you want a modern high horology independent that gives you extraordinarily value and is, if anything, underrated, this is your alternative to FP Journe. If you want to pay a lot less money, get just as much quality in terms of technical innovation, and frankly, finish that is far in excess of what FP Journe offers on the rank and file models. This is a step beyond. This needs to be compared with Greubel Forsey and Romain Gaultier. Did you hear the news about the new blue dive watch? Yeah, I kind of figured you did. But if you don't want to wait 2 years and pay a king's ransom, why not consider Breitling? This SuperOcean 44 gives you everything the Rolex gives you, plus a lot of what, frankly, you would get in a Sea Dweller. Let's talk about the basics. This is a watch that is 1,000 meters water resistant, 44 millimeters in diameter, features a helium escape valve for you saturation divers, and gives you something no Rolex does, which is a captive bezel construction with all parts of the bezel mechanically fixed to the case using screws. So you must remove these little screws to remove the bezel. On a Rolex Sub, you can snap the bezel off on impact. On this watch, you cannot. I'll also mention a feature I happen to love with these watches, the fact that they are all certified chronometers. So while internally it has an ETA 28242, you're getting the highest grade of it, chronometer certified and 5-position adjusted. Tank tough and built like a bank vault. This is a watch that, despite its size, wears well on my small wrist. Even if your wrist is 15 centimeters in circumference, I can recommend the 44 over the 42 in good conscience. You're getting a timepiece that gives you additional quality in the fact that it has that helium escape valve that you don't get on the 42, and then the presence on the wrist is broad and flat. It doesn't feel thick and it doesn't look thick. It'll slide underneath the cuff. It's a graceful, glare-resistant, full satin finished, matte bezel, matte dial watch that has only a handful of polished elements. You can see them on the bezel, accenting rather than overpowering. This is Breitling design at its best. Now, of course, the watch being 1,000 meters water resistant, it is tough as nails. When we water test these watches here at Watchbox, we have to use an incompressible case setting on the water tester because the water testers generally compress and release a case, and it should release by as much as it compresses. But here's the problem. With the Breitling cases, they don't compress. That's how tough these watches are. And let's do a Loom shot. And again, when you're talking about a watch under $4,000, this is exactly the kind of value you want. Tough, lifetime serviceable, a premium brand, dive as deep as you like, a chronometer certification, and a bezel that sounds like mechanical bliss. Have a listen. And I can tell you that 120-click bezel feels as good as it sounds. Now let's talk about a sports watch that sort of defies the genre. This watch was launched in 2008 and it can be considered part of the middle to Datoon timepieces. You've heard of the middle Wrights when studying Frank Lloyd Wright. They were vaguely Aztec, Southwest, and even a little bit Egyptian in design. Well, the middle de Batoon timepieces between the original DB1, DB2, the DB8, and the current DB28s and DB27s and 25s, these 20, 22, and 24 watches are unusual but remarkably capable. Now, this is the DB22, the Power Reserve. It's 48 millimeters in ultra-hard grade 5 titanium, but it doesn't wear like a big watch. It's only about 52 millimeters lug to lug, and in terms of thickness, it's less than 11.5 millimeters thick, so it's broad, flat, and fits easily on a wrist of 15 centimeters circumference or larger. The lugs are short, stubby, and they make this big watch wear comfortably. You can also see that it is remarkably flat on the wrist. What you might not see is that this watch with its screw-down crown is 200 meters water resistant. So being grade 5 titanium, shock resistant, and of course water resistant, it is a remarkably versatile piece. On the dial, you can see the microlight engraving that de Bethune often uses in place of more traditional finishes. So you have these concentric grooves, and they are deeply engraved. You can also see that there's a power reserve indicator that changes from red to black as you wind it, or it winds itself. The power reserve is 6 days. Caliber 2024 incorporates a number of patented features, but I'm going to start at the middle because it's possibly the most unusual of the innovations. There are 4 radial projections, each one with anti-friction jewels set in, and that is a shock protection system that braces the rotor against impact. So the rotor is impact protected, its mass is platinum, and the balance is triple shock protected. There's a shock protection spring on each side and then Inca block over the balance staff. That's called triple parachute. Twin mainspring barrels, you get that 6-day power reserve, and then you can see that there's both a patented hairspring and a patented balance. The balance being crafted of platinum and titanium. Patented balance, patented hairspring. The advantages: shock resistance on the hairspring, concentric beating like an overcoil on the hairspring, minimal aerodynamic resistance on the balance, minimal thermal coefficient, so hot and cold don't change the timing, and maximizing the mass at the rim of the balance. All of this in a movement that's hand finished and extensively so. And again, 200 meters water resistant. This is a timepiece that represented a brief but distinctive period in David Zanetta's designs for de Bethune. He was one of the 2 founding partners with watchmaker Denis Flageolet. And this timepiece, launched in 2008, represents an unconventional and sporty take from one of the most important modern high horology independents. Remember, today, de Bethune is only making 150 watches a year. Exclusivity is guaranteed. Let's talk about thin dress watches in 2 different flavors, and let's start with Jaeger-LeCoultre. Launched in 2013, the Master Ultra Thin Perpetual became a little bit of a pop sensation on the wrist of Dr. Strange. Well, he didn't wear this rose gold model, he wore the same physical case and running gear. This one is warmer and, if I'm honest, more attractive than his watch. As you can see, rose gold case, 9.6 millimeters as I measure it, 39 millimeters in diameter with beautiful integrated lugs. The Master Ultra Thin case returned beauty to JLC case making after the brutalism of the 2000s. Now you can see the dial is a lovely eggshell off-white. It has a handsome, almost sandpaper-like frosted opaline texture, and that creaminess is accented by lovely rose gold indices and hands. You'll note that the hands are half frosted for better contrast against the dial base, and it uses the IWC Kurt Klaus perpetual calendar system, which means you simply adjust the pusher, one pusher for all indications, simply set the correct date for the year you're in, and everything, the day, the date, the month, the leap year phase, the moon phase, the year, the decade, all of it will move in sync. There's a danger zone indicator just over the hands so you know when not to use the system at night, generally from 8 p.m. to 4 a.m., and then it is mechanically programmed through the year 2100. It's powered by JLC caliber 968, which is a combination of mechanical and hand finish, much like you'll find at FP Journe or Audemars Piguet. And JLC was not cutting corners back then. You have unidirectional winding with ceramic bearings, a rugged free-sprung balance architecture. Note the use of a 22-karat winding mass, not 21, not 18, not tungsten. And take note that back then JLC still adjusted these movements in 6 positions, not 5. Today, JLC doesn't even print the adjustment count on its movements. Sometimes newer is not better. Moreover, it features fired blue screws. All these screws are heat blued in a kiln rather than chemically blued. We're going to throw this watch on the wrist. It's an easy one to wear, being short across the wrist, flat, and reasonably sized at 39 millimeters. I can recommend it for a wrist as small as 13 centimeters in circumference. It's a wonderful constant companion, the best of both with the JLC base movement and the famed mechanically programmed Kurt Klaus perpetual calendar. But let's say the Master Ultra Thin isn't thin enough. We're jumping back to the early 1990s, late 1980s with the Audemars Piguet Extra Thin. 32 millimeters in platinum. This is a watch that is only 4.8 millimeters thick, thanks to an extraordinary JLC 803-based Audemars Piguet caliber 2003. Let's talk about the dial first. As you can see, it's a simple Black on white, but with a lovely quarter Roman numeral sector style. Handsome with baton style hands, which you'll note have been varnished black to contrast against the dial base. The watch features the pre-1995 hallmarks, and you can see there is, I believe it's an ibex goat stamped in place of the Helvetic head that came after 1995, and you have the old school lateral stamping of hallmarks. The timepiece is very thin, ultra thin, with knife-like edges, and when you turn it over, things get exciting. This watch features a hand-engraved Audemars Piguet caliber 2003, and it is incredible. 1.64 millimeters thick. Yes, 1.64 millimeters thick. This is a movement originally developed by JLC for Vacheron and Audemars Piguet back in the 1950s. Audemars launched its version as the 2003 in 1953, and Vacheron, for its anniversary in 1955, launched its version of the movement as the 1003. Manual wind, again, 1.64 millimeters thick. All freehand engraved. Every single surface made out of brass has been freehand engraved and then gilded with rose gold. It beats away at 18K, and some of the exquisite details include a wonderful solarization on the ratchet wheel and full black polishing of the click and the click spring. You'll note the same treatment for all of the screws as well as the regulator assembly itself. This is as good gets. I would go so far as to say this is a great watch. Now, on the wrist, it's so thin, it's almost unnerving. It's a very traditional style for men, a discreet size. Confidence comes from discretion, and traditionally, you didn't want to show off your wealth. This is a watch built in the late 1980s that represents the values of the 1950s at Audemars Piguet, and frankly, I can't think of a better tribute to the golden age of Swiss dress watch manufacture. It is watches like this, not the Royal Oak and not the Offshore, that earned Audemars Piguet its place in the Swiss Holy Trinity. And yes, if you're wondering how hand-finished is that movement, the answer is 100%. This watch right here is impressive on multiple levels, but the thing that caught my eye, I'm gonna be honest, was the strap. The strap used here, incredibly, is a factory piece, turquoise. As you can see, small alligator leather on the bottom, large rectangular scale on the top. It has a lovely matte finish with a monotone stitch that's almost aquamarine and folded edges. Now this, of course, is the Torbjorn Souverain Vertical, a watch launched in 2019. It's effectively the 20th anniversary FP Journe Torbjorn Remontoir. It is bigger. In platinum, it's 42 millimeters. It's a little bit over 51 millimeters lug to lug, but it's not as thick as you think, at about 13.6. It's flatter than most watches, but it's thicker than most Journe. Why? There's a simple reason. Let's get close. FP Journe reasoned that when the watch is on the wrist, there's nothing you can do about its orientation. It may take any position. But to achieve the original chronometric purpose of the Torbjorn, as envisioned by Abraham Louis Breguet, Journe reasoned that you use the time on the dresser at night to gain precision. So when this watch is sitting case back down, the Torbjorn is vertical. When the watch is on the dresser, sitting dial down, the Torbjorn is vertical. If it's sitting crown down, the Torbjorn is vertical. And if it's sitting crown up, the Torbjorn is vertical. That reestablishes the effect of the Torbjorn in canceling gravitational deviation. So the orientation of the hairspring changes through 360 degrees constantly when the watch is stationary, achieving, again, precision. The idea is to even out all gravitational effects, but also make it look cool, which is why FP Journe surrounded the movement, or at least the Torbjorn carriage, with a concave mirror dish. And on the underside, you can see mirroring with a lovely concave profile in rose gold, so you can see the Torbjorn making its pirouette. But there's more. Not only is this Torbjorn with considerable visibility and many reflective angles, but it's pivoting at 30 seconds, which is to say each circuit is 30 seconds rather than the conventional Torbjorn's 60. It's free sprung, adjusted in 6 positions, and if you take a close look, you can see both anchors for the Torbjorn axis are black polished. Taking a quick look at the dial, it is made of precious metal. There's a lovely clou de Paris or micro hobnail, and new for this model, you have grand faux enamel dials for the seconds, hours, and minutes. There's a power reserve indicator. Power reserve roughly doubles from the previous watch, from 40 to 80. turn it all over, and you can see that the finishing standard used on the FP Journe Torbjorn Vertical is higher than other Journe watches. Starting with the undercarriage of the Torbjorn, it's entirely black polished. The steel mechanisms of the remontoire d'égalité constant force device also black polished. They're beveled on their edges. The movement is made of 18 karat rose gold, so you have a rose gold movement, a rose gold dial, and a platinum case. This watch feels as special as it is. There's also the remontoire system, which acts as a buffer between the mainspring barrel and the escapement. This, more than anything else, was what made the prior generations of FP Journe Torbjorn accurate, so that the barrel never directly drove the tourbillon. The tourbillon's amplitude would be independent of barrel energy. The remontoire was the secret to accuracy until the vertical tourbillon. Now, and I'm going to do my best to show it, the orientation of the tourbillon for at least half the day when it's not on your wrist restores the chronometric purpose of the tourbillon. FP Journe once described a tourbillon remontoire watch as effectively like breaking your leg and then setting it in a cast. The tourbillon breaking the precision and the remontoire restoring it. This watch gives you benefits from both. Again, this is as special as FP Journe tourbillon watches come. It's a lot of watch. It's not for everyone, and it's certainly not for every FP Journe collector. Short of one of the earliest vintage pieces, the subscription or even the 91 prototype, this is the one that's going to catch the eye of Journe collectors and connoisseurs of high horology. Is it bigger? Is it bolder? Yes, it is, but it also gives you more internally. This watch has heart and soul as well as beauty. Email tmosso@thewatchbox.com for purchase and pricing details of any watch you see here. Time out, Tim out, and thanks for logging on.